Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
Everyone is loving a sea shanty in lockdown, and those were the dulcet tones of Robert Sheehan, singing live from the set of the new series of the Umbrella Academy.
And we'll be having a go at singing sea shanties a little later on. But first of all, welcome to Catch Our Drift. I'm Oliver Steeds, Necton Mission Director and a not very good submersible pilot.
I'm Helen Scales, marine biologist and author who writes about the sea.
And this is the very first podcast of Catch Our Drift, a brand new pod series for people who love the sea. Brought to you by Necton with the One Ocean Flotilla.
Maybe you love being below the waves, diving or snorkeling. Do you sail, paddle, swim or surf? Do you know that irresistible feeling of being by the sea and gazing at the waves? Or maybe you're just curious and want to know more about the ocean.
Whatever your connection is to the ocean, join us as we're going to be setting off on a journey to explore this massive, life-giving and vital place. We're going to be exploring how the ocean seeps into so many parts of all of our lives. We'll speak with musicians, artists, chefs, fashion designers and actors.
In this, our very first episode, we'll be talking about survival. Survival at sea, but also survival of our sea. And we've got some fantastic guests lined up.
We'll be hearing an extraordinary story from Chris Lemons, who got about as close to oblivion at the bottom of the ocean as is humanly possible. He spent 36 minutes underwater without oxygen at more than 100 metres down and survived to tell the tale.
And Ian Urbina, author of the brilliant book, The Outlaw Ocean, joins us with some shocking stories of human slavery and survival. And also what we can do to help save our seas by the choices we make.
We're all looking for different ways to survive through this long period of lockdown. One of the most unexpected trends coming out of this pretty strange reality that we're all in at the moment is the return of the great sea shanty. Sung by sailors over the centuries, they were used to bring a ship's crew into a common rhythm while they worked. And now they're exploding on TikTok and the music charts. Helen, have you got a favourite sea shanty that's caught your interest?
Oh, I do. I have to say I've got a bit of a soft spot for the Wellerman. I really do. I love all the different voices coming in and all those lovely harmonies. And well, a lot of these videos, people that you find online, they're singing from totally different places, but bringing their beautiful voices together. I love it. And sea shanties are just perfect. The perfect soundtrack for lockdown life, really, aren't they? We're all experiencing kind of weird different levels of loneliness and feeling a bit set adrift. And I know a lot of us, I'm certainly suffering from a bit of cabin fever, so a good sing-along and a big sea shanty's perfect.
So we thought we're going to have a bit of a crack at a shanty on the pod. And shanties, of course, are sung with others. We thought we'd ask a friend of the pod, a lover of the sea, who knows a thing or two about performance. From the Umbrella Academy and Misfits, we have actor Robert Sheehan. Robert, thank you for joining us. How are you? Where are you?
I'm in Toronto. I thought, I might do this podcast entirely in song. What do you think?
Please do, yeah.
And I must say, I'm coming at sea shanties completely ignorant. So I know pretty much nothing. Yeah, no, nothing. I was just flicking through the Rolodex of sea shanty file in my head, and there's nothing in there. So I'm brand new to all this. So I hope by the end of this call, at least I contribute to one.
Well, you may just be lucky on that front. We have Trev who's joining us as well.
Yes, obviously, we're not going to teach you ourselves how to sing sea shanties because I'm pretty new to this as well. But yeah, Trev Munkenbeck from the Devonshire group Mariners Away. We are very lucky to have him joining us today. Hello, Trev.
Hi, pleased to be here. Yeah, so shanties, well, we've been singing them for about 10 years now. But it's amazing that during lockdown, we've now had this second revival, this second wave, if you like. And it's no surprise because these are songs of joy. Although the people at sea probably didn't think they were joyful, they are full of rhythm. And it used to be said that if you had a good shantyman, it could save 2 or 3 days sailing on a long voyage. So he was worth his weight in gold because he was like the oil and got the ship into port quicker.
Hey, what about the word shanty? Is that an old word?
Well, allegedly it comes from the French chanter, as in singing, chanter in France. So it's spelt as chanties and then became shanties. So it's a worldwide phenomenon, shanty singing.
How much is alcohol needed on a sea shanty?
For us, it's pretty mandatory, and some would also say a beard. But yes, I don't go with the beard, but the alcohol certainly gets the ship moving.
If you told me, I would have gotten a bit tipsy in advance.
Well, I was going to say, the only thing I managed to find in the house is a glass of rosé, which is about as un-sea shanty as you could possibly imagine. Rob, you got anything in the fridge?
Well, yeah, I've got a cabinet there, but I'm in Toronto and it's 3:00 in the afternoon, and I do have, I hate to be a bit of a spoil sport in the booze front, but I've got a few hours of work to do after.
We're going to need to find you a job on the ship, not just the shantyman. But Trev, what do you think Rob could do on one of these great vessels at sea?
Well, I think you'd be up the rigging somewhere, Rob. Really, climbing up the top and letting the sails down, and you got the musculature for it, I'm sure.
Well, you give me undue credit to my hand-eye coordination. Thanks, Trev.
Should we give it a go then? We've got a few sea shanties in the mix. Trev, you're going to lead us through this.
Yeah,
I think.
Trev, you're our guy. You're going to have to knock us all into shape and tell us what to do.
Well, since we're talking about drink, we may as well do a good old drinking shanty. And you may, with your limited knowledge, have come across this one. It's called A Drop of Nelson's Blood. When Nelson was killed at the Battle of Trafalgar, they put his body, allegedly, in a barrel of brandy to preserve it while they got back in port. And when they actually got back to port, they found that the barrel was fairly empty. So some of the sailors may have been just having a little tipple of Nelson's blood on the way back. We sing about it as rum. But
It sounds just delicious. How nice.
Oddly, Oliver, your rosé is kind of perfect for this.
Yeah, so you're right. I think my glass of rosé can be a glass of blood.
So what we'll do, we'll sing A Drop of Nelson's Blood, and I'll just take you through the verse and the chorus.
All right. Right, Helen, come on. This is your cue.
We'll take your lead and I'll just join in.
We can do that.
Okay.
Take it away, Trev. I'll copy you.
Oh, a drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm.
Oh, a drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm.
A drop of Nelson's blood
wouldn't do us any harm.
Brilliant.
What was the last line?
And we'll all hang on behind.
And we'll all hang on behind.
Easy. What about you, Oliver?
I'll do the bass.
And we'll all hang on
behind.
Yeah. Nice.
Did that sound nice? I think that sounded quite nice.
It would be a barbershop version.
I reckon we could all do it. What do you think? Do you think we can get it all in time?
Yeah, hopefully.
So let's do it with full harmonies now. Just pick it up as you go along and have some fun. That's what it's all about, is having some fun. And then I've actually got some of the other guys who have chipped in. So you can do the whole thing in perfect harmony with the rest of the Mariners Away crew. So, are you ready?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
As ready as we'll ever be, I think.
Ready to rock.
Right, here we go then.
And we'll roll the old
chariot along,
and we'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll all hang on behind.
Hooray!
Well,
Can we clap now? That was so
beautiful.
nice. Just beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
Trev, thank you.
Pleasure.
Nice one, Trev. It has a sort of a plain chant, power. It's like that powerful choir with the many different harmonies going on. It gives you shivers.
It does.
It shivers your timbers, you might say.
Wait, yes.
Feeling quite nautical after that. That's lovely. What did you think, Trev? Be honest. I mean, do we have hope as sea shanty singers?
Absolutely, yes.
Give us a few give us the Weller Man. I'd love to hear that one, if that's your favourite as well. Ellen.
It is. I love it, especially as you say with all the harmonies and I've heard some really lovely versions with female voices as well, and it's just lovely.
There's only me.
Should we give it a try?
I can't harmonise, but I'll put a little bit of. There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was the Billy of Tea. The wind blew up, a bow dipped down. Oh, blow me, bully boys, blow.
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
Oh yeah.
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
Yes.
Well done,
that was
guys.
lovely. Oh,
Nice one,
absolutely
Claire.
beautiful. We may not be working hard when singing that song physically, lifting anchors or climbing rigging, but it's beautiful. I love it.
It's a lovely song, yeah.
But you can envision, can't you? You can envision fellas throwing things back and forth to each other, lugging ropes and barrels and sails and all sorts. You can see. I can start to understand how a shanty could increase the efficiency on board. You know, you're getting everybody into the same rhythm and stopping them thinking altogether. You know, it's amazing power of sound, isn't it? That can do that. And song.
You know, we can all make up couplets like that. So if you had to, you know, go on, you know, thinking of, a drop of Nelson's blood wouldn't do us any harm. Think one up.
Oh, a bottle of hot sauce wouldn't do us any harm. Simply because I've got a bottle of hot sauce sitting right in front of me.
I just say that we must be singing our sea shanties in a sub, and I promised Rob we're going to take you down in a sub at some point. So if you were going to go down in the sub into the depths of the sea, who would you want to go down with?
It'd be nice to go down with, it'd be nice to have a sing-song at the bottom of the sea. It'd be a beautiful thing to be able to claim that you went to profound depths of the ocean and had a sing-song. So in that respect, you know, maybe the Mariners Away crowd would be interesting. You know, get a little intensive huddle going down in the submarine. You know, that'd be lovely. When I was 9 and 10 years old, you know, every week, Sundays and Monday nights in particular, we'd go out and play music in pubs, and there'd be a little kind of a troupe, and the same people would come every week and sing the same songs. And you know, I miss that like an arm. I really do. You know, I miss people just sitting down and just banging out whatever songs they have, you know. And it's a changing world, I suppose. It's a changing kind of social scene. You don't really get people doing that as much anymore, or it's not necessarily the norm as much anymore. But God damn it, it should be, because it's so unifying, you know. It's like a spell. It's like a magic spell, and I think that's what the sea shanties are, you know.
Well, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on, and I promise the next time I sing a sea shanty, I'll be half drunk.
Excellent. We'll do it in person.
Hold you to that, honest to God. When the pubs are open, absolutely.
And Rob, I hope will there be more sea shanty singing on set before filming next? Do you think? Could it be a useful tool to get everyone going?
Absolutely. There's so much time on set waiting, you know. You're in a sort of a stasis for a lot of the day sometimes. So last season we were resorting a lot to charades, which is incredibly great to pass the time and a good giggle, but I think sea shanties will have to make it in there this season, definitely. Trev, it was lovely to meet you and sing with you.
And to all of you guys, yes.
Thank you so much, Trev, for teaching us to sing these shanties. They help sailors survive at sea, and now they may just help us all a little bit to survive this lockdown.
Everybody stay safe and sing those sea shanties to keep your spirits up, I think. I now know what I'm going to do next time I'm feeling a bit glum. Get the sea shanties going and get everyone to join in. It's fantastic.
Perhaps sea shanties could help our next guest in his working life at the bottom of the North Sea. Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you very much for having me.
Chris Lemons is a commercial saturation diver. This highly specialised form of diving involves descending to depths far greater than normal scuba diving, 100 metres and more, and for much longer periods. The The physics behind this is that a diver's body becomes fully saturated with the high pressure gases that they're breathing. It's usually a mixture of oxygen and helium, often piped down from the surface, which means that they can stay under pressure for pretty much as long as they stay under pressure. The only way to end the saturation dive is to slowly release the pressure inside a decompression chamber. That way, the divers avoid suffering from the bends when dangerous gas bubbles can form in their bodies. The working life of commercial divers often involves living inside a pressurized chamber on a ship at the surface and going on daily commutes inside a diving bell to the seabed. And it's down there that they carry out vital maintenance tasks, often on oil and gas rigs. Once locked in, it's effectively one long dive, split between the surface ship and the deep sea. And they only return to surface pressure right at the end of their tour of duty. Chris, your film, the documentary about what happened to you, The Last Breath, available on Netflix, just to get that right?
Correct, yeah.
The film, The Last Breath, tells the unbelievable story of a dive you were on which went south, to put it mildly. It's an extraordinary story of survival. For those of our listeners who haven't seen it, it really is a must. If you're like me, I recommend a few glasses, at least, of whiskey while you're watching it. Because down at 100 meters or so in the North Sea, you were working as a saturation diver on a subsea oil station, and the tether to your undersea habitat and to yourself was severed when the dynamic positioning system that was meant to be holding the ship on station failed. You survived without oxygen for 36 minutes underwater before being rescued, hauled back into your habitat and resuscitated. Towards the end of the film, you mentioned that you don't know how you survived on what minimum oxygen you had in your system. Perhaps the lowering of body temperature helped shut down the less vital organs. Perhaps your tissues were saturated with oxygen and with the gas that you had, giving you enough to survive. I imagine lots of doctors must have wanted to put you under their microscope. Since it happened, have you found out any more about how you survived?
Yes and no, really. I mean, I've been lucky enough to go and speak with people down at the Royal Medical Society down in London and various hyperbaric conferences. And, people obviously know far more about these things than I do. But, I mean, even to this day, I don't think we really know exactly what it was. We have sort of theories, but I think to some extent we'll never know because there was no way of anybody being with me in the last few minutes and seeing exactly when I passed out, for example, and things like that. But we've had suggestions, but definitely no final answer as yet.
So, Chris, obviously accidents are thankfully very rare in this industry, and you don't go into this thinking that something so terrifying is going to happen to you. But the idea of being so deep in such a small confined space with things that can go wrong, and in your case, sadly, obviously they did. There must be a special reason why you do this.
I used to work on the back deck of a diving boat, and I used to watch these guys from a distance, these, what seemed at the time to be slightly aloof, mysterious types who went into these tanks and did this amazing job down on the bottom of the sea. I've learned since that's completely untrue, and there's nothing even slightly glamorous about it. But, that was it, really. I think there's that little need in me, like there is in all young men, I suppose, at the time, to try and be a bit of a hero and do something a bit adventurous. There was definitely a bit of that. I think they turned up on the quayside in slightly nicer cars than me, if I'm totally honest as well. But there's nothing really more romantic in it for me than that. I feel a little bit divorced from the danger of it because it feels so sanitized and controlled and regulated, Obviously, the deeper you are, I suppose, when something does go wrong, the consequences are perhaps more severe. And I suppose that is always at the back of your mind.
This kind of commercial saturation diving that you do, Chris, how long can you actually stay down for?
We are limited. So in terms of periods of saturation, you're absolutely right. We're limited in the UK and in UK waters to 28 days. So we have to be out literally to the minute within 28 days of us going in. But that's not really. That's partly for physiological reasons, but mostly from my point of view, it's for mental health reasons or mental reasons. Really, it's in a strange way. You're in a very healthy place. You eat pretty decent food every day. You exercise every day. It's completely dry. There's no alcohol. You breathe clean. I was going to say air. It's not quite air, but you breathe clean gas. And you live a sort of monastic lifestyle for 6 months out of 12 of the year. So it's actually not a bad place to be for longevity, I don't think. But yeah, I think in terms of your sanity, that's a different matter. You know, being locked, that's the real difficult part of the job. The relief is actually getting in the water every day and doing your job for 6 hours a day on the bottom of the sea. The hard part is the other 18 hours when you've got to live in very close confines with other human beings who you may or may not necessarily get on with, and also the psychological stresses of being locked in a place where there is no escape. You know, your mother dies, your appendix bursts, you break your leg, you still have to go through that period of decompression as a best case, you know. So they're the stresses, I think.
Yeah, we've got people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others who like to say one day we need to move off our planet and move to Mars or elsewhere. But do you think that living in the sea would be preferable? You've lived down there longer than the rest of us. Is it our future? Should it be our future?
There are lots of parallels, aren't there, to going into space. I just read a great book about, I forget his name now, but he just an American who spent a full year on the International Space Station. And while I would never in a million years try and compare my job to his, because you know he has to have qualifications and have a level of intelligence that I don't have, you know. There are loads of surprising parallels in terms of the confinement and the claustrophobia and the routines and going to the toilet and having a shower, all of which involve pressure and that kind of thing, you know. So, yeah, there are definite parallels to going into space as there are with diving. I guess you're closer to home, aren't you, on the seabed, and it's a lot prettier, I suspect, than on Mars, but it depends what it's like on the surface, I suppose.
Having spent time under the surface, the sea does feel a hell of a lot more appealing than Mars.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that one, definitely. Yeah, well, it's a beautiful place to be, isn't it? Underwater, it is, and that's. I mean, ultimately, you asked me that question earlier on. Ultimately, I think that's why anybody involved with diving does diving, isn't it? I think for me, and that still stands true in the work that I do. It's that moment that you get in the water, isn't it? That moment of tranquility and peace and silence and being on your own in this vast, very beautiful place, isn't it? You know, and that's what draws us back. You know, even if I spend 6 hours lugging a sandbag around, it's still got that minute at the beginning that's very beautiful. Yeah.
Well, one final question for you, if I may. Imagine for a moment you were going down in a sub instead of being saturated. Who would you like to take a sub dive down with into those depths to explore, to spend some time underwater with, in whatever reason? People who are alive, dead. Who would you like to spend some time with down there?
I've got two little girls who are 6 months old and 4 years old now, and that's my fantasy, really. That's a little fantasy I have of taking them down diving one day, and not to the bottom of the North Sea, but yeah, to the Barrier Reef or something like that, to see the clownfish and point them out and have them think, this is what Daddy does for a living, and isn't he amazing? I suppose, yeah, like every dad. So yeah, that's my fantasy. Sorry, it's a little trite.
No, it's beautiful. I have two little girls as well.
Yeah.
I share the same dream that you do, to share the sea with them. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's been fantastic to spend a bit of time with you. There's so much more that our listeners can find out about your work, and we hope that you can share the sea with your wonderful kids in due course. We're glad you came back from the dead.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much indeed for having me. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, what a lovely, lovely chap. But I guess I'm still struggling to understand how he actually managed to survive. I mean, so many things to be going in his favour. You always need a little bit of luck sometimes in life. But Chris, he seemed to have used up all of his 9 lives and then was going back diving a few weeks later. Helen, are you tempted by a little bit of technical diving, perhaps, down to greater depths?
No, to be honest, it still terrifies me, the idea of commercial diving, of being in such huge depths for such a long time and just being under pressure and in those tiny chambers for such a long time as well. I don't think it's for me. I think you can go down beyond about 100 metres with rebreathers, can't you?
Yes, yeah, we've used some on our Nectar missions in Bermuda. We worked with an extraordinary team of rebreather divers who came from around the world, and they were down for 8 hours, 9 hours, and they would start down at 100, 120 meters and then gradually come up doing the task we had set them. So they were doing these visual transects and undertaking video research of what's on the seabed and then taking samples and things. So it's incredible what you can do.
Must get hungry, I'd think. How do you keep going for all that time? Maybe smoothies with a straw, and you could just, suck them up while you're diving. Perhaps that's how you do it. I don't know. Well, if you want to find out more about Chris Lemons and his extraordinary tale of survival, then do check out his website, chrislemons.co.uk.
Our next guest is a fellow journalist, a brilliant reporter from New York Times and others, and the author of an extraordinary book, The Outlaw Ocean, Ian Urbina. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Our ocean, as you reported, is a wild and little understood frontier. It's too big to police under no clear international authority. There are immense regions of treacherous water playing host to rampant criminality and exploitation. Traffickers, smugglers, pirates and mercenaries, wreck thieves and vigilante conservationists, along with elusive poachers, seabound abortion providers, clandestine oil dumpers, shackled slaves and cast adrift stowaways. Just some of the stories which you reported on in the Outlaw Ocean.
I did just recently read the book, Ian, and I guess what I came away with was just, well, the immense, overwhelming scale. In so many ways, and the book itself is big, but you sit down and it utterly absorbed me. But the scale of the oceans, the scale of the time involved in all of this. You know, I'm a marine scientist. I've worked in fisheries. I've been on fishing boats for maybe a day at a time. I've been on research boats for maybe 2 weeks, but the time that people spend on these ships and the conditions they're in, I came away with just this big sense of enormity of the issues and of this space that you've been writing about. And you swept me away and took me with you, and it was an extraordinary read. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Are you still reporting on the subjects?
Yeah, so
in this time of COVID?
The reporting has occurred over the last 6 years in stages. The first 2 years was for the New York Times, and then the next 2 years was for the book. Then I stepped away from the Times, created a nonprofit journalistic outlet called the Outlaw Ocean Project, and sort of dedicated myself and my team for another 5 years of reporting on these stories.
I guess one of the issues that we face here is knowing more now about just the scale of illegal fishing and the issues that come with that, both ecological and in terms of the human impacts. But I'm curious about that link between the animal that's taken out of the ocean and the one that ends up on the plate. And when are we going to see a point, do you think, when we can confidently be kind of ethical seafood consumers and know that this thing on my plate isn't connected into these terrible stories which you tell in your book?
The culture, legal history of fishing is really kind of decades behind other industries when it comes to expectations of accountability and transparency. You know, if you're an airline pilot and you're flying for UPS or FedEx, it's entirely expected that before you take off in that plane, you'll have to verify that all your cargo is registered, and you're going to keep your transponder on while you're in flight, even in international airspace, and your crew is registered, and the airport you're arriving to knows you're coming, and all these things, right? But if you take a Taiwanese tuna longliner captain, when they leave port wherever they are and they enter high seas, it's not a big deal. It's not shocking if they go dark, if they turn off their transponder. It's not unusual that no one really knows what's on their vessel. Virtually no one knows who's working on the vessels. These sorts of things are distinct to fishing. You won't find them in shipping or rail or aeronautics. And I think those are cultural shifts that will have to occur before seafood becomes more accountable like these other supply chains.
I think it's 1 in 5 fish served up on the plate is still coming through illegal fishing. We know what's happening. You're reporting on it. Environmental groups, human rights groups are reporting on it. But that awareness isn't still in people's minds. There often is a trigger point where we see a point of change. Is there one within this that you think could affect the scale of change that we need to see at the speed we need to see it?
The market, and especially huge buyers, have the ability, almost like dictatorial governments, to make really efficient decisions that can have an outsized impact on the downstream suppliers. And so if tomorrow the EU as a buyer or Walmart as a buyer decided they were not going to buy any tuna or shrimp or whatever that didn't comply with a set of rules, we knew every ship it came off of, we had the crew manifesto, that would send a very immediate shiver through the industry to all the suppliers. Unfortunately, of all the stakeholders, they're the ones that are moving the least and the slowest. When I talk with people who work in the space, academics and advocates, they are the most frustrated with how little the companies are moving. In terms of what the spark would be, your other kind of version of your question, I don't know. I mean, what I know it's not is quick hit, single big stories. A front page piece in the New York Times or the AP don't do the trick, in my view. Sort of my theory of social change as journalism plays a role is that you have to convince them, whoever the them is, that you're not going away, and just keep crescendoing it. And also you have to have a multilateral approach. It can't just be one news outlet, one type of story. It's got to be sort of a flood of the field.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm hearing that there are multiple lever points. There's multiple key actors, and each of us can have a role to play in that, both as consumers, active consumers, to hold those suppliers to account where we're buying our fish, all the questions that we're asking, the restaurants and other things, but also in our professional lives, which may be as journalists, it may be in business, it may be in finance, it may be in advertising, it may be in education. Each of those actors has a place and a role to play, which is driving this humanitarian, ecological, criminal activity, which is undermining the health and resilience of our planet.
There are a lot of us. There are lots of different types of folks who collectively can get involved in small and large ways, and that's consolation.
I mean, one other thing which strikes me of the challenge that we have is around enforcement, and you write about it. You constantly report on it. Just to give people a sense of it, last year, 2020, there were all sorts of horrific crimes occurring in and on the ocean: human trafficking, bonded labor, slavery, human rights abuse, ecological abuses, i.e. IUU, ecological crimes, dumping toxic waste at sea. On and on we could go. But within all those crimes, what percentage of them do you think have actually been prosecuted last year?
I would put it at less than 5%, of all that happens out there ever reaches prosecution. I would say less than 30-40% even sees the light of day, but a very, very small portion of it ever gets investigated and ever makes it to any level of law enforcement action.
So why not? Why aren't we having more enforcement?
Well, this gets to the original point that Helen was making. It is a freakishly sprawling space, 2/3 of the planet. And for the most part, because it's so expansive, people just stay away from each other and traverse it. 90% of what we consume comes across it. And generally speaking, without much fanfare or drama, when bad things do happen out there, there's no one to witness it. There's no one who has the incentive to follow up. So the primary victims of the murder, of the slavery, of the dumping, of the overfishing tend to be the least empowered demographic on the planet. And so these are Indonesian deckhands or the coast of Ghana. These are players and places that are not armed with well-financed lawyers who have the incentive to do something about the crime that occurred. The demographics of who are the victims here is relevant. The size of the space, the jurisdictional complexity of much of that space being high seas, and therefore there are no police that really guard the high seas, have jurisdiction to do something about what happens on the high seas. So if something's going to get investigated, litigated, prosecuted, it's probably going to happen back at port. But which port? Who exactly is going to do something?
Yeah, and if we're 2021 being billed as this ocean super year, where we hope there are going to be some critical decisions made, whether they be COP26, the G7, CBD, and other things within this space, international maritime law, for example. If we were going to zero in on one thing that you would like to see happen, that you hope could happen this year, what is it?
Can I do two? I think CBD is super important. I think the biodiversity treatment is immensely important and really ensuring that it gets, imposing certain rules and mechanisms for creating marine protected areas, for example, on the high seas is really, really consequential. And I also just think technologically, there's really promising things going on by use of satellites to see those who don't want to be seen. And if we can continue seeing developments in that arena, price point of getting that satellite information, the public access to that information, the engagement of academics with that information, I think those are really promising things.
So I guess winding back a little bit, for people who haven't read the book, and if you haven't, you definitely should, but for people who haven't yet picked it up, is there one particular story that for you like to tell that somehow sums up the issues that you broadly are talking about?
Wow, that's a tough question from a journalist to a journalist. Wow, good luck with that one, Ian.
Thank you, Oliver. Choosing between my children, I would say there are two, but extremely acute slow motion problem that I feel deeply passionate about is this story of Seafarer Abandonment. And this is this crisis that is unfolding all the time. On any given day, there are thousands of mostly men, because maritime is mostly male, workers, a lot of them on merchant vessels, but some of them on fishing vessels, for whom they find themselves in the same basic situation, which is overnight, the owners or decision makers of their vessel have disappeared or cut contact. Maybe they decided it was time to just cut their losses and declare bankruptcy. Maybe they've run into legal problems. For whatever reason, the ship is cut loose and they're still at sea, or they're in port, near port. But the deckhands and the officers who work on that vessel have no way to get home. They don't have the fuel. They don't have immigration papers to disembark, and they're genuinely stranded. And having seen the scope of the problem and the severity of these people who are literally trapped in a watery prison cell, sometimes for 2 years on end, no clean water, no food, and their families often don't know where they are, and the mental health decay and the sort of tragedy of those situations rarely gets covered, and that is an acute problem that I sort of hold close to heart and was described in the book as well. The book focuses on these two Tanzanian stowaways who, out of Cape Town, snuck on a ship. The ship was called Donna Liberta, Greek ship, went to sea, were discovered at sea, were brought on deck. And the captain, and this has to do with, this decision of the captain has some to do with new fines and regulations and penalties that came down post 9/11, born of fears of terrorism and illegal immigration. But the captain told the crew, make these guys go away, deal with it. And what that essentially meant was they were supposed to raft them, which means you don't kill them, which happens, and throw them overboard, but do the middle ground option, which is we don't want to arrive in port with them on board because we're going to get hit with a $100,000 fine for that, and we'll be delayed, and we'll get in trouble with our insurers and all sorts of stuff. So build a makeshift raft, which is what they did, put them on the raft and cut them loose and hope, for the best for them. So that's what happened to these two guys. And the story recounts how they survived barely. One of them died essentially when they washed up on shore in Liberia. He died within hours later. The other survived, made it all the way back to Tanzania, this was Liberia, then back to Cape Town. I heard this story and wanted to find the survivor and was able to sort of just land his personal story and also the story of these guys in general. That was one category of survivors that I think is really sort of hobos of the sea, really riveting.
Thank you so much, Ian, for sharing the incredible work that you are doing. Harrowing stories of so many problems at sea. Helen, what are you going to take away from what we've just heard? Are there things that you think you can do, we can do, that might be able to change things through our daily lives?
Well, I'm definitely going to get lots of copies of Ian's book and send them out to family and friends, and see what they think as well, and try and pass on these stories that he's talking about, because I think there is that huge power in talking and thinking and spreading these ideas around in any way we can, to keep these things in the public eye and to push for that change that we need. We've seen how public pressure can lead to really important changes in the way things are done with things like plastic pollution. Such a public outcry there's been against unnecessary single-use plastics that we are starting to see companies making those big changes that are needed. And as Ian pointed out, in fishing and in shipping, it's these big players that are really not making the changes that need to happen. So we need to push for that change.
You hear stories like that and you just got to respond. You have to try and do something. And perhaps sunlight can be a disinfectant. It seems that if we can shine more light on the fish supply chain, if we all knew that there was a link between the fish that we eat, slavery or murder at sea, or the massive destruction of life in our ocean, you have to hope that we might start to think and act differently with our consumer decisions. I'm trying to think about what we could do. I mean, one thing that we are doing at Necton is starting to use these new pocket-sized gene sequencing technologies. So I'm going to try and see if there's a way in which we can use that to radically improve transparency in the supply chain.
I really like your idea of that phrase, the disinfectant of sunlight. And we need that. We need to be able to shine a light on what's really happening here.
Well, we've got to be optimistic, and that's the challenge, I think. We've got to take it on board. We need to know the darkness when it's happening out there on the front lines, but hopefully we can change the direction of travel. We just need to all do it. Well, that's it for this first episode of Catch Our Drift. I think it's time we all went off and practiced our sea shanties. But if you do want to follow up on any of our guests, and if you'd like to hear some more sea shanties from Trev and his crew, then do please visit our website, catchourdrift.org, where you'll find all the info that you need.
And you'll find us on social media. Follow us at Catch Our Drift. Do come and say hello, and we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this first episode. Next time, we'll be finding out how sport fits into the big picture of the ocean. And we'll hear from former F1 racing champion Nico Rosberg about his involvement with Extreme E and how sport can be used to highlight the climate crisis. So, thanks for listening, and catch you next time on Catch Our Drift.